I didn't grow up without a father. I grew up knowing exactly who he was, and knowing he didn't want me. Every success he celebrated was built while pretending I didn't exist. And the truth is, being invisible hurts more than being abandoned. I learned very early that names matter. Not because they give you identity, but because they tell the world where you belong. Mine never did. Every form I filled out as a kid felt like a small interrogation. First name, last name. I always paused at the second line, not because I didn't know how to spell it, but because it felt incomplete. Like a borrowed word, like something temporary. Teachers never noticed, doctors didn't care. But I did. I always did. We lived in a small apartment on the south side of Chicago, the kind of place where the walls were thin enough to hear other people's lives bleeding through them. Arguments, laughter, television's always on. I grew up listening to strangers exist while trying to understand my own place in the world. From the outside, my life looked normal. Inside, it felt unfinished. My mother worked 2 jobs. Always tired. Always careful with money. Always careful with words, too. Especially when the subject drifted too close to something she didn't want uncovered. I noticed that before I understood why it mattered. Some questions just made the air heavier. Some silences lasted longer than they should. I didn't grow up asking about my father. I grew up learning not to. That lesson came quietly. Not through punishment or anger, but through tension. The kind that settles into a room and teaches you boundaries without ever being explained. Whenever other kids talked about their dads, something in my chest tightened. Not pain exactly. More like a warning. Like stepping too close to an edge you can't see. At school, Father's Day projects were torture. Construction paper ties, crayon drawings. Fill-in-the-blank sheets asking what your dad did for a living. I learned to keep my answers vague. I learned to finish early and sit quietly. I learned how to disappear without leaving my seat. And still, I told myself there had to be a reason. That belief became my first coping mechanism. I convinced myself that absence didn't mean rejection, that there was a story behind it all. A complicated one. An adult one. Something I'd understand later. Kids are good at lying to themselves when the truth feels too sharp. The first real crack appeared when I was about 10. It happened in the most ordinary way possible. A television left on too loud. A local news segment playing in the background while my mother cooked. I wasn't paying attention until I saw the city skyline flash across the screen. Then a man appeared. Confident. Polished. Calm in a way I had never seen up close. Something about him pulled my focus instantly. I didn't know why at first. I just felt it. A strange familiarity that made no sense. The way he stood. The way he tilted his head while listening. The way his name was spoken with respect, like it carried weight. My mother froze. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I did. Her movements slowed. Her shoulders stiffened. For a brief moment, the room felt like it stopped breathing. Then she turned the volume down and kept cooking, pretending nothing had happened. That moment stayed with me. From then on, I started noticing patterns. The news stories she avoided. The magazines she flipped past too quickly. The name that never appeared in our apartment but somehow hovered around it like a ghost. I didn't have proof. I didn't have answers. But I had instinct. And instinct can be louder than facts. What scared me wasn't what I knew. It was what I was starting to suspect. I began to understand that my father wasn't absent because he was gone. He was absent because he had chosen to be. That realization didn't hit all at once. It crept in slowly, changing the way I saw everything. My childhood memories, my mother's fear, my own last name. And once that thought takes root, it doesn't let go. I started watching that man on TV whenever he appeared. I memorized details without realizing it. His career, his projects, his influence. I noticed how people spoke about him like he was untouchable, how his life looked so clean and complete on the surface. It made my own life feel smaller by comparison. Not because I wanted what he had, but because I started wondering what part of it had been taken from me before I ever had a choice. The hardest part wasn't the poverty. It wasn't the cramped apartment or the secondhand clothes. It was the growing sense that my existence had been edited out of someone else's story. By the time I reached my teens, I understood something most people never have to face. That some men don't abandon their children out of weakness. They do it out of calculation, out of fear of consequences, out of a desire to protect an image more than a life. And that kind of abandonment cuts deeper, because it tells you exactly where you rank. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't confront my mother. I didn't ask for explanations. I carried the weight alone, letting it shape me in ways I couldn't yet name. I told myself there would be a right moment, a safer time, a version of me strong enough to hear the truth. What I didn't know then was that silence, once accepted, becomes a habit, and habits have consequences. By the end of that year, I wasn't just a kid without a father. I was a secret someone powerful had decided to keep buried. And that secret was already changing me. Fear doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like control. My mother was a master of it. She controlled what was said, what wasn't, and how far my curiosity was allowed to go before it became dangerous. I didn't understand that at the time. I just knew there were invisible lines in our home, and crossing them made her quieter, not louder. That was worse. Silence meant I'd gone too far. As I got older, her fear became more obvious, not in words, but in behavior. She locked the door twice at night. She checked the windows before going to bed. She flinched when unfamiliar cars stopped too long in front of our building. None of that felt normal for a woman who had nothing to hide, except she did. One night, I asked a question I had rehearsed in my head for weeks. I didn't say his name. I didn't accuse. I didn't demand. I just asked why my last name was different from hers. Simple, innocent, logical. Her reaction told me everything. She didn't answer right away. She sat down slowly, like her body needed time to catch up with her mind. Her hands trembled just enough for me to notice. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't angry. It was scared. And fear, real fear, has a way of infecting the room. She told me some people had power. She told me power made people dangerous. And she told me that asking questions could ruin lives. Not just mine. Hers too. That was the first time I understood that my existence wasn't just inconvenient. It was risky. I wasn't a missing piece. I was a liability. Something that needed to stay quiet to keep the world stable. To keep him stable. From that day on, my mother watched me more closely. Not because she didn't trust me, but because she was afraid of what might happen if I learned too much too soon. She warned me about strangers, about authority, about trusting the wrong people. Lessons disguised as parenting, but rooted in survival. I started noticing the sacrifices she never talked about. Jobs she turned down. Neighborhoods we never moved to. Schools she avoided. Everything in our lives seemed carefully calibrated to keep us small, unnoticed, forgettable. That realization hurt more than any absence ever could. Because it meant she wasn't just protecting me from a man. She was protecting me from a system, from influence, from consequences that didn't play by fair rules. Whatever my father was involved in, it was big enough to scare a woman into reshaping her entire life around silence. And still, she loved me fiercely. That's what made it complicated. Her fear didn't come from weakness. It came from knowledge. From seeing something close enough to know it wasn't safe. I could hear it in the way she prayed at night, asking for nothing but invisibility. No success, no recognition, just peace. But peace has a price. By my early teens, that price was starting to show. I felt trapped in a life that wasn't fully mine. Like every decision had already been made by a man who had never even looked at me. I began to resent the caution, the limits, the constant message that staying quiet was the only way to survive. What my mother didn't realize was that her fear was teaching me something else entirely. It was teaching me that whatever my father had built, It was powerful enough to destroy people who stood too close. And that kind of power does something to a kid. It makes you curious. It makes you angry. And eventually, it makes you reckless. By the end of that year, I wasn't just living with unanswered questions anymore. I was living with a growing hunger to know the truth, no matter what it cost. And deep down, I could feel it coming. The moment when silence would no longer be enough. My mother sensed it too. That's when she started lying to protect me. And lies, no matter how loving, always leave cracks. I didn't mean to start following his life. It just happened. Once you notice someone, it's impossible to unsee them. He began appearing everywhere, on the news, in newspapers left behind on buses, on magazine covers at grocery store checkout lines. Always well-dressed, always composed, always introduced with titles that sounded permanent, like they'd been carved into stone. That's how my father existed in the world. Solid, respected, untouchable. And I watched him from a couch with a broken leg, in an apartment that smelled like old paint and cheap coffee. Every appearance felt accidental, but they came too often to be coincidence. I told myself I was imagining patterns, that my mind was forcing connections where none existed, but my body reacted before my logic could catch up. My stomach tightened. My breathing slowed. Something inside me went quiet every time his face filled the screen. He talked about responsibility, about legacy, about shaping the future of Chicago. People listened like he was explaining the rules of the universe. Anchors smiled at him. Reporters softened their questions. Even criticism sounded respectful. I learned his schedule without trying. When he spoke, where he appeared, which neighborhoods he invested in, which charities he supported. I knew more about his public life than most people who admired him. What I didn't know was why I felt like I was watching my own reflection distorted through glass. At school, kids talked about their parents' jobs, construction workers, teachers, mechanics, normal lives. When someone mentioned him, because his name carried weight, they spoke with admiration, pride, sometimes envy. I stayed quiet, afraid my face would betray me. I was terrified someone would notice the resemblance, not because it was obvious, but because once you start looking for it, it's hard to miss. The same jawline, the same posture, even the same way he paused before answering difficult questions, like he was calculating the safest version of the truth. That thought kept me awake at night. I started wondering if he knew. If he ever watched interviews and saw traces of himself in the background of his own memory. If my name had ever crossed his desk. If my existence was something he actively ignored, or something he trusted others to erase for him. The worst part wasn't jealousy, it was proximity. He lived in the same city, walked the same streets, breathed the same air. His offices were only miles away from where I did my homework. The distance between us wasn't geographic, it was intentional. Once, during a school field trip downtown, our bus passed one of his buildings. A massive glass structure with his company's name etched near the entrance. The guide spoke about economic growth and vision. I stared at the reflection of the city on that glass and felt something shift inside me. That building felt like a locked door. Not because I wanted to go inside, but because I knew it wasn't meant for me. From that day on, my anger sharpened. Quietly, carefully. I didn't lash out. I didn't rebel. I absorbed it. Let it sink into me like fuel waiting for the right spark. Every headline praising him felt personal. Every award ceremony felt like confirmation that the world had chosen him and erased me. Still, I said nothing. At home, my mother noticed the change. The way I watched the news. The way I asked questions that didn't sound like questions anymore. She tried to redirect me, to keep the television off, to change the subject. But it was too late. He was real now. Not a concept, not a shadow. A man with a voice, a schedule, and a legacy. All unfolding in real time while mine felt paused. I realized then that waiting for answers wasn't going to protect me. It was only making me smaller. And the truth I hadn't fully accepted yet was already forming in my mind. If I didn't understand who he was, I'd never understand who I was becoming. That realization scared me more than anything else so far. because it meant the next step wasn't passive anymore. It meant getting closer, and getting closer to powerful men always comes with consequences. The truth doesn't arrive like an explosion. It arrives like a fracture. Small, quiet, easy to ignore at first. The crack appeared on a night that felt no different from the others. My mother had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from a double shift. The TV was still on, volume low, casting flickering light across the room. I should have gone to bed. Instead, I noticed the envelope. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't addressed to anyone, really. No logo, no return address. Just my mother's name written in careful, unfamiliar handwriting. I told myself not to touch it. I stood there for a long time, arguing with myself, feeling that familiar pressure in my chest, the warning I'd learned to recognize. Then I opened it. Inside were copies. Not originals. Legal-looking documents. Typed pages filled with words I didn't fully understand yet, but certain names stood out immediately. My mother's. Mine. And his. Seeing his name on paper, connected to mine, did something violent to my sense of reality. It didn't feel real. It felt staged. Like evidence planted in my life by mistake. My hands started shaking before my brain caught up. There it was. Clear. Unmistakable. A settlement agreement. A confidentiality clause. A date that lined up perfectly with my birth. I didn't need to understand the legal language to understand the intent. This wasn't absence. This was management. A decision made calmly, deliberately, with lawyers and signatures. A problem solved with money and silence. I sat there on the floor for a long time, documents spread out in front of me like proof from a crime scene. My childhood replayed itself in fragments. The fear, the rules, the boundaries. None of it was accidental. He hadn't disappeared. He had paid to disappear from me. That was the moment the story changed. Not because I learned something new, but because what I had suspected was now undeniable. The man I had watched from afar wasn't just my father. He was the architect of my silence. And suddenly, every sacrifice my mother made had a shape, a signature, a number attached to it. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. She woke up briefly, asked if I was okay, and I nodded like a coward. I folded the papers back into the envelope and put them exactly where I found them. But I wasn't the same person anymore. The next morning, the city looked different. Louder, sharper, more hostile. Every billboard felt like propaganda. Every glass building felt like a reminder of how easily people like him controlled outcomes, controlled narratives, controlled lives. I skipped school that day and walked, miles, through neighborhoods I didn't recognize. I needed movement to keep from breaking apart. Somewhere along the way, I found myself near downtown Chicago, staring up at buildings that suddenly felt personal. One of them was his. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Just standing there was enough to make my heart race. This was the center of it. The place where decisions were made that rippled outward and landed in apartments like mine. Decisions that erased names before they were ever spoken out loud. I understood something then that I hadn't before. Power doesn't shout. It signs papers and lets silence do the work. That realization hardened something inside me. The anger I'd been carrying finally had a direction, a target. I stopped seeing myself as unlucky. I started seeing myself as inconvenient. And inconvenient truths don't stay buried forever. That night, I lay awake replaying everything I had learned, knowing there was no going back to ignorance. The crack had spread. The structure I'd built to survive my childhood was compromised. Sooner or later, it was going to collapse. And when it did, someone was going to notice. Once the truth has a shape, it demands movement. Silence stops working. I told myself I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't even looking for confrontation. I just wanted clarity. A full picture. Something solid enough to stand on. That lie lasted about a week. It started small. Public places. Safe places. Libraries where nobody noticed a quiet teenager sitting too long at a table. I read old newspapers, business sections, articles about real estate deals and political donations. The same name appeared again and again, always surrounded by words like visionary, philanthropist, leader. I read between the lines. Settlements disguised as partnerships, sudden resignations with no explanation, stories that stopped abruptly, like someone had decided they were finished. Patterns emerged, the kind you don't see unless you're looking for cracks instead of praise. And I was looking. The deeper I went, the more reckless I became. I stopped caring who saw me. I asked librarians for archived records. I asked questions that didn't sound casual. I didn't realize how exposed I was becoming, how out of place a kid like me looked digging through the history of powerful men. I also didn't realize how closely powerful men watch their shadows. The first sign came in the form of a phone call my mother didn't answer. Unknown number. Left a voicemail with no message. Just breathing. The second came when someone asked me, politely, why I was so interested in old stories. That question landed heavier than it should have. I told myself it was paranoia, that I was nobody, that curiosity wasn't a crime. But deep down, I felt it, the shift. The moment when curiosity becomes visibility. When asking questions turns you into a variable someone wants to control. I started noticing things. A car parked too long across the street. A man in a suit lingering near the bus stop who didn't look like he belonged there. It could have been coincidence. It probably was. But once fear has a reference point, everything aligns around it. I made my biggest mistake on a rainy afternoon downtown. I walked past one of his offices again, closer this time. Close enough to read the names on the directory. Close enough to imagine what it would feel like to step inside and say my name out loud. That thought terrified me and thrilled me. I didn't go in, but I was seen. That night my mother finally broke. She didn't yell. She cried. Quietly. The kind of crying that comes from exhaustion, not emotion. She told me I was playing with something I didn't understand. That men like him didn't need to threaten. They didn't need to explain. They simply made problems disappear. And I was becoming a problem. That was when I understood the real danger wasn't discovery. It was persistence. The more I learned, the clearer it became that my father's power wasn't just financial. It was relational, institutional. He didn't control people. He controlled outcomes, and outcomes always favor those who move quietly. I promised my mother I would stop. I meant it in that moment. Fear has a way of making promises sound reasonable. But fear doesn't last forever. Questions do. Lying in bed that night, I realized something irreversible. I could walk away and stay safe, or I could keep going and risk everything. There was no middle ground, no safe version of the truth. And for the first time in my life, I chose danger. Because once you know you were erased on purpose, being invisible stops feeling like protection. It starts feeling like surrender. Silence doesn't disappear. It ferments. I stopped digging, just like I promised. At least on the surface. No more libraries. No more downtown walks. No more questions that could echo back to him. From the outside, I looked compliant, quiet, manageable. Inside, something else was growing. Anger is a strange thing when you don't know where to put it. Mine didn't explode. It focused. It sharpened. It turned into a constant pressure behind my eyes, a hum that never shut off. Every memory felt newly infected. Every rule my mother had enforced now looked like evidence of fear imposed by someone else. I wasn't angry at her. I was angry for her. I saw how small her world had become. How cautious. How narrow. She had traded possibility for safety, and I was the collateral. That understanding twisted something deep in my chest. Love and resentment tangled together until I couldn't separate them anymore. I started staying out later. Walking at night. The city felt different after dark. Honest in a way daylight never was. Empty streets didn't judge. They didn't ask questions. They just let me exist, fully, without shrinking. That's when I began imagining what it would feel like to be powerful. Not rich, not famous, just untouchable. I pictured walking into rooms without explaining myself, saying my name without hesitation, taking up space instead of apologizing for it. Those thoughts scared me at first. Then, they comforted me. They became the only place where the imbalance made sense. At school, my grades slipped. Not because I was dumb, but because I stopped caring about systems that had already decided where I belonged. Teachers called me distracted. They had no idea how much focus it took to carry that kind of anger quietly. I got into my first fight that year. Over nothing. A comment, a look. I don't even remember what started it. I just remember the relief afterward. The clarity. For a brief moment, all the noise in my head went silent. That terrified me. Because I liked it, I realized then that anger, if left unchecked, doesn't just burn outward. It burns inward. It looks for shortcuts, for release, for anything that makes you feel real again. And I was dangerously close to choosing the wrong kind of power. My mother noticed. Of course she did. She always did. One night, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and asked a question she had never asked before. "What are you becoming?" She didn't say it with judgment. She said it with fear. The same fear she had lived with for years, now redirected at me. That was the moment I understood how cycles start, how men like my father are created. Not from cruelty, but from avoidance. That night, I made a decision. I would never confront him in anger. I would never beg for recognition. And I would never let bitterness decide my future. If I was going to become something, it would be on my terms. That realization didn't calm me immediately. Anger doesn't leave that easily, but it gave it a direction. Instead of lashing out, I began pulling inward, observing, learning, waiting. Silence, I learned, could be used strategically. And for the first time since discovering the truth, I felt something new rise above the rage. Control. I told myself I wasn't going there for him. That lie lasted exactly until I stepped through the revolving door. The lobby smelled like money and restraint. Polished stone floors, muted voices, security guards trained to notice what didn't belong. I felt it immediately, the way my presence bent the air. Not hostile, just unwelcome. I straightened my jacket anyway, repeating my name in my head like a shield. This was downtown Chicago at its most honest. Clean on the surface, controlled underneath. I approached the desk and asked calmly if I could leave a message. Not a demand, not a scene, just a message. The receptionist smiled without warmth and asked who I was there to see. When I said his name, the room changed, a fraction, enough to feel. She asked for my business. I told her the truth, carefully. I said my last name, then my first. I watched her eyes flicker. Confusion, calculation, training snapping into place. She asked me to wait. I waited. Minutes stretched. Phones rang. Shoes crossed marble. No one looked at me for long. Security arrived before an answer did. They were polite, professional, apologetic in a way that meant final. One of them asked me to step aside. Another asked for identification. I handed it over. He studied it longer than necessary, then returned it with the same neutral expression. "There's no one available to meet with you," he said. I asked if my message would be delivered. He didn't answer that. They didn't escort me out. They didn't need to. The message was clear without being spoken. Doors don't have to slam to stay closed. Some are designed to never open in the first place. I walked back outside into gray light, my reflection breaking apart in the glass as the door spun behind me. I felt foolish for expecting anything else, for thinking that proximity might equal access, that blood might matter more than image. It didn't. Standing there, I realized something sharper than rejection. This wasn't personal to him anymore. It was procedural. Systems had been built to handle people like me efficiently, quietly, without escalation, without records. I had become a risk assessment. On the train ride home, I replayed every second, searching for meaning in gestures and pauses. There wasn't any. That was the meaning. I hadn't failed because I lacked courage. I'd failed because I'd misunderstood the game. Power doesn't negotiate with emotion. It waits for it to exhaust itself. That night, I didn't tell my mother where I'd been. I didn't need to. She saw it in my face. The finality, the way something had closed for good. She hugged me without words, and for the first time, I felt older than she was. The door hadn't opened, but it had taught me something. I stopped wanting his acknowledgement after that. Not because I didn't need it, but because I finally understood the cost of asking. I couldn't afford to keep knocking on doors designed to erase me. So I decided to build my own. And the moment I made that decision, everything shifted. I stopped chasing doors. I started building habits. It wasn't dramatic. No speeches. No sudden breakthroughs. Just quiet mornings and long nights, stacked one on top of the other. I realized that if my name meant nothing in certain rooms, then my work would have to speak first. I enrolled where I could afford. I studied what I could access. I took jobs no one wanted and treated them like apprenticeships. Every skill became a brick. Every failure, a measurement. I learned how systems worked because I'd seen what they did to people without leverage. I kept my circle small. Distractions felt expensive. Anger still visited, but it no longer drove. I let it fuel discipline instead. When I felt the old pull toward confrontation, toward validation, I went running. Miles through the cold, through streets that reminded me why invisibility could be turned into focus. In Chicago, winters teach you patience. They teach you to layer up, to prepare, to wait for the thaw without demanding it arrive early. I adopted that rhythm. Slow gains, compounding effort, no announcements. The first real win didn't look like success. It looked like consistency. Showing up when no one watched. Finishing what I started. Learning to negotiate without emotion. To listen more than I spoke. To let my work collect evidence quietly. I chose a name. My name. And decided it would stand for reliability. For delivery. For results. Not for bloodlines or favors. I watched peers chase shortcuts and burn out. I watched doors open for others and close just as fast. I stayed the course. Then momentum arrived. A contract renewed. A recommendation passed along. A problem solved faster than expected. Nothing viral, nothing flashy. But each step reduced my dependence on anyone else's permission. Each step added weight to a name I was finally earning. I didn't hide my past. I just stopped leading with it. The shift was subtle but permanent. People began to seek me out. Not because of who my father was, but because of what I could do. Meetings ended with follow-ups. Emails turned into calls. Calls turned into trust. And trust compounds. One morning, watching the sun rise over the skyline, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not pride. Peace. The kind that comes from alignment, when who you are matches what you're building. I understood then that names don't come from inheritance. They come from repetition, from showing up when it's inconvenient, from choosing patience over noise, from building leverage without asking for forgiveness. I wasn't erasing him from my story anymore. I was making him irrelevant. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a reaction. It felt like a plan. Success didn't announce itself. It accumulated. One quiet win stacked onto another until the weight became undeniable. I didn't wake up rich or influential. I woke up dependable. And in the long run, dependability opens more doors than charisma ever will. People started introducing me without qualifiers. No backstory, no context, just my name and what I delivered. I noticed it first in small ways. How meetings ran on time when I was present. How decisions moved faster after I spoke. Then, in larger ones. Longer contracts, broader responsibility, trust placed without hedging. I learned to read rooms, to understand incentives, to negotiate without exposing need. Power, I realized, isn't loud, it's precise. It shows up prepared and leaves with alignment. And alignment creates momentum. There was a moment, standing in a glass-walled conference room overlooking Chicago, when it finally clicked. The skyline didn't intimidate me anymore. It reflected me. The city that once felt like a locked system now felt navigable. Not welcoming. Navigable. That was enough. Opportunities came with strings. I declined some, accepted others. Each decision reinforced the same rule: never trade autonomy for speed. I'd watched that bargain ruin lives. I wasn't interested in borrowing leverage, I was building it. Then came the call I never expected and didn't need: an intermediary, careful language, respectful tone, an invitation framed as collaboration. I listened, I thanked them, I declined, not out of spite, out of clarity. I didn't owe proximity to anyone who had priced my absence. What surprised me wasn't the relief, it was the indifference. I had crossed a line I didn't know existed. The one where permission stops mattering, where acknowledgement becomes optional, where your name carries its own gravity because of what it consistently represents. That night, alone in my office, city lights stretching outward like a map of past mistakes, I understood the real victory. I wasn't proving him wrong. I was proving myself right. The boy who learned to disappear had learned something more valuable: how to be undeniable. And once you're undeniable, the past loses its leverage. I heard about him the way you hear about storms after they've passed. Through headlines, through whispers, through conversations that no longer required my attention. His influence was still intact, but something had shifted. Partners retired, boards reshuffled, legacy projects stalled. Nothing dramatic, nothing scandalous. Just the slow erosion that comes when time meets overconfidence. Power ages differently when it's built on control instead of contribution. We never spoke again. There was no final confrontation, no confession, no apology that arrived too late. And for a long time, I thought I needed one. That closure required an exchange, a reckoning. I was wrong. Closure arrived quietly, on a morning when I stood above the city, watching the sun rise over Chicago, realizing that his absence no longer defined the shape of my day. I didn't measure myself against his choices anymore. I didn't calculate my progress in reaction to his silence. He had lost the last thing that mattered: relevance. Not in the public sense, in mine. I had built a life that didn't require explanation, a name that carried weight because of repetition, not inheritance. People trusted me with outcomes, with decisions, with futures that weren't fragile. And that trust, earned slowly, deliberately, was something no settlement could buy. I thought about my mother then, about the fear that once governed our lives, about how carefully she had navigated a world tilted against us. I understood her better now. Fear had kept us safe long enough for me to grow strong. Strength had done the rest. Being a bastard had taught me discipline before comfort, patience before praise. It had stripped away illusions early and replaced them with clarity. I didn't romanticize it, but I didn't resent it either. Some men inherit doors, others learn how to build walls and then gates. If he ever thought erasing me would protect his legacy, he miscalculated. Not because I came back for it, but because I outgrew it. The measure of a man isn't what he denies. It's what he can no longer control. I took one last look at the city and smiled. Not out of triumph, but out of peace. The story that began with silence had ended with ownership. Of my name, of my time, of my future. I wasn't his mistake. I was my own success.